After having done the video on the science of the Akasha, which also contains the understanding of Thoth's unique place in that with his Akasha, I felt guided to create this video about Thoth's incarnations on this planet. Not all of them. I don't know all of them. I don't think there were a great deal of incarnations, but I do know about some, and just briefly I thought you might find it interesting. My knowledge about his incarnations stems the whole time that I have been consciously working with him. In other words, he didn't just tell me a whole bunch of incarnations at once. He began many years ago with casually mentioning them, one here and then maybe 10 years later another, like that. So I've accumulated the knowledge on these particular past lives. Many of his past lives, he was not the only soul. So when we look at Thoth as Thoth Muzurud and Thothracemus of Afra, the two in which he was actually called Thoth, which was a title, and it was also Tehuti. There were other versions of it, but it was all a title. That was a singular soul. So that's the soul I'm tracing here. But he had other incarnations where he was a layered soul. In other words, his soul was sort of the top of the heap of a layer of souls that animated and worked through a particular body. I'll go into that a little more as we come up with those particular incarnations. In other lifetimes, he was a walk-in. There were also singular lifetimes as well. The art you will see here is, of course, Midjourney. They are facsimiles. I'm not professing to get exact images of these beings, these incarnations. However, I work diligently at it, and I feel that what I do present to you here, or anywhere that I'm presenting a particular personage or a type of personage, that I'm capturing the basic look and definitely the energy and the projection from that image of the actual entity. Now, I'm kind of gravitating away from using my second life avatar of Thoth. I think he's a pretty good representation, but I can just do so much more in Midjourney. Unfortunately, I can't recreate a particular look again and again exactly. Not yet, but it's coming. The technology is advancing quickly. But I'm capturing the essence again of the person and the overall appearance and look. So that said, let us begin. Ushael. This is not actually an incarnation, but it's where we need to start. According to what Thoth has told me, Ushael is the name he gives to his highest oversoul expression that creates the incarnating frequency. So I don't believe Ushael has ever been incarnated. And the way I see him in my mind's eye, or feel him in my mind's eye, is it as a human being, as an image of a person. But I don't think he's actually ever had that incarnation. However, it's the determining factor of all the incarnations he's had on this earth. Lord Melchizedek. Now, this is the name that Thoth has applied to the entity he was, or layered with. Again, we have this layered soul situation. So there was a layered soul who came from Venus to Lemuria, and began the Grail lineage, is what Thoth refers to. Again, he's using our words, here, the Grail lineage on the planet. There's more about this in my Grail series, The Path of the Grail, or the Grail Path. So this was the entity that began the lineage that he's referring to on the planet as the Grail lineage, that included Yeshua and many other factors. Thoth Muzurud. and that is without the H. It's Thoth Muzurud. This entity came from the blue star Rigel. He did not incarnate on the earth. Like Lord Melchizedek, he arrived. Lord Melchizedek arrived from Venus, but his actual soul connection was through Rigel. Thoth Muzurud brought the emerald tablets with him, and he did not bring them as tablets. He brought them as an internal energy pattern of light-inscripted knowledge and wisdom. They would be later transferred to an alchemical emerald that was part of a table, and the sections of the table, or the circuitry, are the tablets. I'm going to be doing a video on this rather soon, so I won't go into it further here. In a Thoth transmission from my earlier work, Thoth states, as Thoth Muzurud, I came within a vesica of light, a Merkaba of golden and blue-white fire from Rigel, through the Asfetitas, which he calls the belt of Orion, and descended into the Rastaru, or Rastau, the etheric manifold of the plain of Giza. With me I brought the Enochian table, containing the blueprint for the building of the Temple of the Risen One, later to be called the Temple of the Lion, which is now known as the Great Pyramid. I was the master architect of this construction, which began in the year 10,400 BC. It was completed in 10,348 BC. Bear in mind that the original pyramids of Giza looked far different than they would in later eras. And now we come to Thothracemus of Afra. From the Thothic record, he states, it was not until 9,160 BC that I entered the genetic earthborn embodiment through which I would reassume my Thoth role as Racemus of Afra. In this earthborn form I would dwell for 300 years. When I returned to Egypt, the priests of the great temple saw beyond my physical body into the auric veil which surrounded my form, and they knew that he who is the Tatet, the Tehuti, had returned. To those of my family and personal fold, I was known to them as Shansi, the beloved. While it was as Thoth Muzurud that he was master architect of the original Temple of the Risen One, or Temple of the Lion, the Great Pyramid at Giza, as Racemus, he again became its architect in greatly renovating it after the Atlantean deluge. Also as Racemus, he wrote in the Akasha most of the Thoth texts, such as the Book of Thoth and the Pymander. Imhotep, architect and much more, to the Egyptian king Zoser. I have no Thothic information on this particular lifetime, so I'm going to resort to going to Wiki. Imhotep means one who comes in peace. He's from the late 27th century BCE, an Egyptian chancellor to the pharaoh Djoser, possible architect of Djoser's step pyramid and high priest of the sun god Ra at Heliopolis. Very little is known of Imhotep as a historical figure, but in the 3,000 years following his death, he was gradually glorified and deified. Imhotep is among the few non-royal Egyptians who were deified after their deaths, and until the 21st century, he was one of nearly a dozen non-royals to achieve this status. The center of his cult was in Memphis. The location of his tomb remains unknown despite efforts to find it. The consensus is that it is hidden somewhere at Saqqara. Aventa. This individual I know nothing about, and he's not famous, so I can't look him up on Google. He was only brought to my attention the other day, and Thoth tells me that he was the organizer or main leader, I guess you could say, of the physicians of the Blue Pharaoh. Now, I assumed that Thothracemus was that person. But he said Thothracemus began the order, but it was his incarnation as Aventa that really founded it. Took it on and made it something that it was in its form, which continues today and is in the inner earth. But Aventa was an Egyptian, and he didn't stay long in that incarnation. That was apparently his main duty at the time. Some more about the physicians of the Blue Pharaoh, this given to me from Thoth in 1998. From among the chariot of the sun, that is Thoth's Merkaba of souls, you might say his soul team, is assembled a gathering of physicians who come together in concert to assist those souls incarnate who are under the protective mantle of Chariot of the Sun, and to those for whom these kindred open the scroll for our touch to be received. We have given them the name, for your identification purposes, of Physicians of the Blue Pharaoh. In the days when I, Thoth, walked the earth as Thothracemus, I created a clinic of physicians, which I named the Physicians of the Pharaoh, and that is spelled Pharaoh. This word Pharaoh means royal epoch or passage of time that was within a higher field of consciousness and purpose. For instance, in the astrology of that age, a pharaoh was denoted in the heavens when certain stellar alignments came together, creating a royal epoch of time. Thus, the physicians of the pharaoh implied physicians who were dedicated to serving the greater metatronic or full light consciousness of health and well-being, which was confluent with the royal epochs of stellar harmonies. And so now he tells me that his incarnation as Aventa was where it was really grounded and brought into a more dimensional and dynamic aspect, into other planes of experience. He currently calls this title the Physicians of the Blue Pharaoh because of Rowena Patty Kreider's Gaia Matrix Oracle card, the Blue Pharaoh. It so relates to the energies that were expressed in this Pharaoh Physicians order. From Rowena Patty Kreider's Gaia Matrix Oracle on the Blue Pharaoh, and I quote from her book here. The card of the Blue Pharaoh, light body agent of the formative world in the new earth, healing of nature. Symbols are source, remembering, coils of deep memory of sentient experience surface to consciousness. Agent is fearless, the clear facing and transformation of all karmic vestiges. The process is gathering, bringing life experience into a single focus. Effect is essence, the extraction of essence from life experience. The Blue Pharaoh is the light body created by the refinement and intensification of your life through the central nerve of the Sushumna up your back, which actively changes DNA material that is the code for the unfoldment of life towards the light. The Blue Pharaoh refers to the electronic magnetizing power of the Grail itself. The Grail can transform historical events and empower or destroy light messengers or knights. That's Knights. And now from Thoth. It is this very light body of which the Gaia Matrix speaks that was the vessel of discharge for the sphere of light, the Modas. That is Modaas. The means to purify distortions in the light body cannot be accomplished without the knowledge of the Grail and the wisdom that knowledge brings to the true initiate of the heart. Amenophis. This is not the king Amenophis, who is also called Imhotep. This individual was an architect and sun priest during the reign of Akhenaten, who according to Thoth was the last shepherd king of Egypt and a very important figure in the Grail dynasty of spirit. Amenophis was a relative of Akhenaten, therefore he had the same star genetics, and he was very close to him in guiding and helping him to move forward with the plan of the greater Grail family, of which Akhenaten was a key figure. Girash, this was the incarnation of Thoth who established the craft of the brazen serpent. Again, I believe it was Thothracemus who brought it forth to the earth, but I say that Girash established it because it became embedded as a sacred order during his lifetime. I'm not quite sure what nationality Girash was, but he was not Egyptian. This was more Middle Eastern, but I would say the beginnings of some kind of a Celtic Hebraic combination. That's the closest I can come to the feeling I have about it. Concerning the craft of the brazen serpent, these are alchemists from various ages within the chariot of the sun, those gathering of souls under Thoth. This craft contains the masters of alchemy who created the Holy of Holies and all major sacred temples on the planet. In Egypt, their main centers were Arum Kapha in the city of On and Amenophis at Sais. Other major centers through the ages were in India, Tibet, Assyria, Turkey, and Greece. Also more recently in Peru. King David of Jerusalem. The Thoth soul entered the body of King David at the day before his coronation as king. He was layered then with the original soul of King David. So the original soul was what Thoth calls the body soul, and the secondary but capstone overlying soul was Thoth's, and he entered the time just before his coronation. Part 3 of the Grail Path series talks more about King David and his role in the Grail experience on the planet. You can find the Grail Path series as a playlist on Blue Star Rising. Hiram Abiff. This was the architect of King Solomon's temple. This was a single soul incarnation of the Thoth Ushael being. I have written about him in the Temple Doors issue 3, 1997, which one can find if they are subscribed to my Vault of Thoth, which requires a certain monthly donation. You will notice how often the Ushael Thoth soul is an architect, among other titles. In the ancient days, an architect was much more than it is now. They were high initiates, priests, priestesses, if the case may be, and they were skilled and connected in an oracular way to the cosmos, understanding of dimension, geometry, energy. They were indeed quantum physicists. So they were able to design structures that were in accordance with that higher field of consciousness and spirit. Hiram Abiff was ritually murdered by the Pharisees. In the Thoth transmission, which I published in Temple Doors 397, Thoth speaks about this. Hiram Abiff's design for an underground temple beneath the planned Solomonic temple was a threat to the Falel, the fallen lords of light. Had his underground temple been completed, it would have presented a sacred haven and place of most esoteric learning for those known as the Essenes in their preparation for the birth, life, and ministry of Yeshua, or Jesus Christ. The Falel, and thus their minions, the Pharisee, chose to cut off a chain of events which would have transpired had the underground temple been completed. This chain would have greatly changed the course of Christian history in a most positive manner. Even so, one vault of the subterranean temple was constructed and is sealed away to this day. There are other incomplete portions as well which await discovery. Yet there is more to the story. I, Thoth, who was the soul of Hiram Abiff, allowed myself to be taken and killed. For in this act, so I assumed the karmic blow to mankind and released it into the higher heaven to be consumed by the devouring flame. So you can see that this expression from Thoth, this sacrifice, is very similar to the sacrifice of Yeshua in the crucifixion. And Thoth, that soul, Ushael, whatever you wish to call him, and the pure soul of Yeshua and the Osirian soul of Yeshua, all were of the same sun spirit Christic vibration. Now only the pure soul came through as the Christ, bringing through the archangel, the Christos archangel, into his expression. However, there were 9 sun spirit souls that composed the soul grouping, which was of that Christic expression, and it was the pure soul that was the spearhead of that mission on earth. The mysterious and enigmatic Enoch. Thoth was one of the 5 souls of Enoch. He was the capstone soul. I don't know a great deal about him from the Thothic perspective. However, Thoth has used the word Enochian and Enoch many times in his references in regard to a grouping of consciousness. The Enochian masters, for instance, he says he is one of the Enochian masters. So this refers to a type or a qualification of high soul experience. And so Enoch would have been an incarnation of his which fulfilled that experience, that expression on earth. Quetzalcoatl is another incarnation of those that I know little about. However, he has indicated to me that this was a turning point for the planet in receiving certain instruction and energies within the rebuilding of the consciousness patterns of Lemuria and Atlantis. This was after the fall of both, the deluges that destroyed them, and after the time tsunami. But Quetzalcoatl apparently brought back, at least to the Americas, to the ancient peoples of America, certain key codes that were redeemed for the planet. Both the Aztecs and the Mayans referred to him as a light-skinned being. So obviously he was not one of them, and Thoth indicates that he came from the stars. He was in fact from Orion as a blue star Solarian. The Indian ruler, Ashoka the Great. In this instance, the Thoth soul walked in to Ashoka's body after the king's long illness. It was an exchange. The other soul left, but continued to stay close to learn from the experience. And so at that time, Ashoka changed greatly. Historically, you can see that he was rather not bloodthirsty exactly, because his enemies made him seem more than he was. He wasn't really. For the time, he was a ruler, and rulers, had armies, and they fought each other for territory. That's just how it was in those days. That's where the mindset was. So, in that sense, yes, he was rather fierce, but not as much so as was made out to be. And so, when Thoth stepped in, then the ruler became very spiritual and illumined, and became a wise and great ruler, and put his warring nature aside. From an article I wrote some years ago, the soul of Thoth entered the mortal being of Ashoka as what we now call a walk-in. Historically, as a king, Akosha conquered many lands and people, resulting in the slaughter of thousands. However, after he had acquired a large kingdom in this manner, he suddenly renounced violence and became a Buddhist. It was at this point, so says Thoth Hurray, that he, Thoth, entered the being Akosha. It was upon the great river that Akosha fell face forward from the horse's back and unconscious. His soul came out of his body, and mine entered therein, so says Thoth. According to what I have received, as Akosha, the Thoth soul established an inner circle of priests to whom he entrusted sacred utterances of his visions. These were actually originally given by him to a priesthood in Mu, Lemuria, when he was the Lord Melchizedek. Now as Akosha, he presented several books of the Melchizedekian sacred utterances to his Indian priests. Shortly after this, Akosha Thoth departed the form. He had intended that these priests pass the sacred utterances on to select schools of chanters, for these utterances were to heal and restore living things, actually transforming the DNA. However, only a few schools were created, and due to an epidemic, the original priests died and the schools came to an abrupt end. The Thoth soul became layered with John the Beloved at some point during the time he was an apostle. I really don't know much more about this other than he was there in that position of souls to support the Yeshua embodiment. Thoth states that John the Beloved was also John of Revelations. Now, it's not entirely clear to me if these were two separate incarnations, but I think not. I believe it was more of a transfiguration of sorts, in which John the Beloved went through a process of becoming John of Revelations, much like the young Tirna transformed into Thothracemus in the cave of Mithara. I now read to you from my article on my website, Templar Priory of the White Stone. The soul of Thoth, as Racemus of Afra, comes from the house of Salome, from whence sprang the house of David, the lineage of Yeshua, Yeshua, Jesus. The Thoth soul was one of the layered souls of the Apostle John. It was through John that the Johannine Stream Church came forth. The Church of Peter was intended as an outreach for the masses, while the Johannine Church maintained the deep font of the Christic mysteries. The Petrine was active in faith, while the Johannes was present in knowing. Now we follow Ushael, Thoth, into John Martinez. John Martinez was the son of Yeshua and Mary of Magdalene. Now this soul incarnation would have overlapped the John of Revelations, most likely, possibly even the latter part of John the Apostle. But that's no problem. Even more ordinary souls often have overlapping lives. It's not really common, but it's not rare. And certainly souls of the caliber of Thoth would have no difficulty in doing that if they found it necessary. So to continue with the same article I was just reading, John Martinez was the only child of Yeshua and Mary, conceived after the crucifixion, when Yeshua appeared to Mary on the Isle of Iona, where Mary and her companion guardian, a Greek named Martinez, had gone for this specific purpose. Some months after John was born, Mary left him in the care of the Ionian priestesses and continued her travels, taking her to France. At the age of 8, John was taken to what is now Glastonbury, accompanied by the Ionian priestess Elaine. John Martinez was the soul of Thoth, so Thoth was one of the souls of the Apostle John and the single soul of John Martinez. Thus John, the son of Yeshua, was really the true living Johannine church. Thoth has called him the first Templar, as it was this John who established through the power invested upon him by his father the Ichthus Dominus. This was a holy doctrine upon which the Templars were established. An order did not come forth from it until after the death of John Martinez, but it was he who instigated it in his final days, that upon his transition such an order was to be established. His wish was carried out by the 2 men and 1 woman who served him during his lifetime. According to Thoth, John was buried under the Eave of Wrens at Glastonbury. Again, Thoth was the capstone soul of a 5-soul composite in this incarnation of Merlin or Merlin. I have written a manuscript entitled The Chronicles of Merlin, which follows his story from his conception to sometime in his manhood, but not including the Arthurian aspect of it. This, of course, is according to the Thoth Akasha. Merlin's family name was Galatane. They were originally from Gaul, but his father, along with 3 aunts and an uncle and their families, came to the Isle of Man off the coast of Scotland, led by a shining one in his father's visions. It was there, upon the small island, that Merlin was conceived and born. Merlin's father, Hestor, and his siblings had a powerful mix of genetics, part ultra-terrestrial, from Rigel in the constellation of Orion, and also some cosmorphic or fairy. This was in an age when the veils which separate the nature and human kingdoms were still fluttering in the winds of change. Thus the fairy people, or cosmorphic beings, could at certain levels merge their seed with humankind. Hestor and his kin had a strange blend in their veins, coming from the stars, the nature realms, and the Gauls. Further on in the story, the child Merlin dwelt in a world between human and nature, touching both, yet aware even in youth that he would never be truly accepted by either realm. Merlin's father felt the burden as well. He became troubled and haunted in dreams by his own fears. He was sorely tempted by the dark side in the flexing of a power that brought security to his feelings of instability. The story of Hestor of Galatane, his temptations, trials, and eventual triumph, is a book unto itself. I will not, in this writing, venture into that forest. Yet it need be known that Hestor fell from grace, not only in the sight of God, but in the eyes of his lovely Mary Grace, that is, his wife and the mother of Merlin. When she found her beloved to be a practitioner of the dark face, he who masked the light, and no longer following the star-sent gaze of the Shining One, Mary Grace fled the sacred grove of the sky-jewel spring, taking her 3-year-old son with her. She left Hestor to his wanton magic in a dark cavern near the grove, and went out into the night, the child conceived of her husband's light clutched to her breast. And the story continues. From the Book of Groves, written by Merlin, O thou who shall no longer comfort me, to thee is given my power and glory. Stake not my heart upon the fiery sword of truth, for my love of thee is beyond the chasm that separates men from gods. The Merlin Chronicles can be found in my Vault of Thoth as an unpublished manuscript. A link to the vault is in the text box below this video. I know little about Christian Rosenkreutz from the Thothic record, as Thoth has not opened that scroll for me entirely. So I'm going to begin by reading to you from Wiki. Christian Rosenkreutz is the legendary, possibly allegorical founder of the Rosicrucian Order, Order of the Rose Cross. He is presented in 3 manifestos that were published early in the 17th century. And he gives a list of those. Well, according to Thoth, he was certainly not allegorical. To continue, according to the legend, Christian Rosenkreutz was a medieval German aristocrat orphaned at the age of 4 and raised in a monastery where he studied for 12 years. He discovered and learned esoteric wisdom on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land among Turkish, Arab, and Persian sages, possibly Sufi or Zoroastrian masters, supposedly in the early 15th century. Returned and founded the Fraternity of the Rose Cross with himself, Frater C.R.C., as head of the order. Under his direction, a temple called Sanctus Spiritus, or the House of the Holy Spirit, was built. I'm going to pause here in the reading to say that Thoth agrees with all of this. However, at 4, he was placed in that monastery, and this was done so by a certain group of people who were essentially from the inner earth, but they lived on the surface. There are many people like that. And they did so because they knew his destiny. And the monastery they placed him in was a very special one. It wasn't an ordinary monastery. So all of this had a purpose and a plan for him to become the founder of the Rosicrucian order. It's true that he gained more knowledge and wisdom from his studies with Zoroastrianism and all of these other things, but he initially had this knowledge within him, even at age 4. It was within him. And as time progressed, of course, he gained even more knowledge and understanding of his true role in life. The Rosicrucian order, as it became, is not what it was originally. That is not to say it doesn't still have some fine qualities and wisdom in it, but it's not the core principles and energy of consciousness that Christian Rosenkreutz created in the initial program. And that almost always happens with the Templars, with anything. It becomes diluted, it digresses, which doesn't mean it loses its full bloom, but the rose certainly wilts on the outer edges of the petals. And yet, it was not a failure. None of these orders in their initial true purpose ever fail. They go beneath. All of these orders, like the Templars and the Rosicrucians, their core is still within the deeper levels of consciousness. And in most cases, there is a core group somewhere holding that frequency for future ages. To continue with Wiki, it is described that his body, as discovered by a brother of the order, was in a perfect state of preservation 120 years after his death, which occurred in absolute secrecy. As Rosenkreutz had predicted, his body was in a heptagonal chamber erected by himself as a storehouse of knowledge. And he had predicted, apparently, that his body would be preserved there. Well, now this is interesting because as I continue to read in Wiki, after I'd already received what Thoth gave me about his genetics being from the inner earth, Rosenkreutz's crypt, according to the description presented in the legend, is located in the interior of the earth, recalling the alchemical motto VITRIOL, Vista Interior Terrae Rectificando Invenis Occultum Lapidum. Visit the interior of the earth by rectification, thou shalt find the hidden stone. Wiki then presents a story about how this young boy wound up in the monastery. The story is not entirely correct, according to Thoth, but in the story it says while the parents were murdered for a political reason, an adept of some secret order brought him to the monastery. While the murder is not correct, the fact that he was brought by an adept is. And this particular family that he was to have come from were part of this sacred order. It also states that some occultists, including Rudolf Steiner and Max Heindel, and much later Guy Ballard, have stated that Rosenkreutz later appeared as the Count of Saint Germain. Thoth does not agree that Rosenkreutz was Saint Germain. However, the soul of Saint Germain was one of the 5 souls of Merlin, along with Thoth. So there's obviously a strong relationship between these 2 souls. And now, Thoth is telling me that the Saint Germain soul was also a part of the Rosenkreutz soul layering, as Rosenkreutz also had this 5-tier soul connection, just as he had as Thoth with Saint Germain in the Merlin incarnation. In conclusion, we come to the last 2 incarnations I'm sharing with you here. These are concurrent with our reality now. There's a slightly removed dimension involved in both, but it is in the frame of connection to our reality as we know it. I will now read from an article I wrote some years ago. In 2002, I received the awareness that the illumined Master Thoth, his soul name given to me as Ushael, had reincarnated into current embodiment on Earth. According to my Thothic perception and Akashic insights, the Thoth Ushael soul merged with an already incarnated young man of 25 who had been consciously prepared to receive the Ushael soul. This is not what is commonly referred to as a walk-in, but is instead a layering of souls and beyond to a merging of these 2 souls for the period of this incarnation. The current Thoth Ushael incarnation for the purpose of this transmission is given the name of Thoth Ami, meaning Thoth, one who gives breath to, Ami, divine accord or centered being. His actual longer name is Tihuti Madjula Hakti Nada. Thothami is now projecting the capstone ray of the threefold ray of divine breath that is unique in signature to the Thothic streaming into the etheric bandwidth of the earth. This threefold breath is gradually expanding the natural breath of the etheric waveform of the earth and is interpenetrating both the lunar and solar shells of the planet, creating a cosmic circuit of the breath as well. The Thoth Ushael Magna, or Oversoul, is now facilitating the Christic flow through the earth by reinforcing the planetary sacred breath. By intentionally placing ourselves within the crucible of the Thoth breath, so we may be gathered into the greater matrix of the planetary breath. Practice breathing through the heart while feeling, sensing, knowing the Thoth breath within you, which is a natural function of the human planetary whole. Yet it is at this time being facilitated by the threefoldness of the incarnating soul, Thoth Ushael. I pause here to say that Thoth is speaking of Thoth in the inner earth, the Ushael oversoul, and Thoth Ami. The 3 are combining for this Trinity focus. As Thoth Ami continues to anchor his new incarnation among us within this electromagnetic zone of Earth, so we may find a loving tutor of the breath within our direct energy field. The incarnation of Tihuti Majula Haktinada, or Thoth Ami, Ushael, has revealed to me that he is experiencing his first incarnation in this dimension of Earth since Christian Rosenkreutz. This incarnation will be of a single layer, that of the soul of Ushael, and not a combination of several souls. However, he will be surrounded with a shield of streaming light from his Merkaba of souls, the chariot of the sun. To lend a clearer definition to that last statement, Thoth has stated that the Ushael Thoth soul entered a body that was already incarnated with another soul. And yet the other soul did not step out, and it was not necessarily layered with. There seems to be another process here that I'm not familiar with. And this is that the two souls became one. That is a profound statement, and I'm really not prepared to go into it any further at this time. What is the purpose of this incarnation? Ushael Thoth reveals it to me in this way. The primary purpose of the incarnation of Thoth Ami is to insert and anchor the light codes Ushael carries into the earth in a new way, a new delivery of the Thoth lineage. The Thoth teaching lineage is one of making way for the Christic power in the earth. In all its activity, so this is its primary agenda. The mission of Thoth Ami specifically is to set a new reference point in the minds and hearts of specific spiritual teachers on the planet, so as to accommodate the plan and purpose of the Christ in the 21st century, and in preparation for the coming cycles leading to the vibrational ascension of souls into the new Earth star reality. Thoth Ami's greater work will be simply to anchor his living flame in the earth. His inner earth embodiment as Thoth Hurray will continue, as this is in another dimension of the earth's reality. I wish to state that Thoth Ami is actually in our electromagnetic zone. He has unusual abilities, but he is in this zone. Thoth Hurray is in the slightly removed dimension within the inner earth. Thoth Hurray is what he calls himself, to me anyway, in his hollow earth, inner earth incarnation. This is in a slightly removed dimension, and I've written a great deal about the inner earth and Thoth Hurray, so I'm going to be brief here because I don't want to make this video much longer, and we still have one other section to go. Thoth Hurray is the embodiment that Thoth created after Thothracemus of Afra. He went into the inner earth at that time, kind of reformed himself to a degree, but still very similar, and became Thoth Hurray. It is in this incarnation that he holds the frequency of the divine fire of the central sun Atoma. He is also one of the 9 sun spirits along with Yeshua and Osiris. And so as such, he holds the frequency of the sun of our solar system. So the two are connected through Thoth Hurray. He is also genetically both a star being and an earth being. He has human earth genetics. So all these things come together in him, and he holds that point in the sacred hollow. While Thoth Ami contains the frequency in our current reality, Thoth Hurray holds that divine spark of transformation into the new earth, because in the inner earth, he's in the city of Seraphim, which is directly connected to our new earth consciousness. So he's holding that space, that place with the central sun Atoma, which is our transfer zone into the new earth through the flashpoint of light principle 40. Thoth calls the souls in his Merkaba of chariot of the sun that are at the very center of the hub of this arrayment. He refers to them as the Echo Shakti. Now there are many souls in this ring or sphere of light that is his Merkaba. But the Echo Shakti are at the very center of the hub of the wheel. And they are the highly illumined ones. At the very lowest rung in this wheel are those souls such as myself who are scribes of Thoth or working with him in some way that are here incarnated on the earth as more or less regular but aware human beings. I've been guided to create some images that you'll see here that represent the energy, the fluid, lumen light coming from the Echo Shakti, because they are a very important part of the whole picture of what Thoth radiates forth for the planet on his Ushael level, which is the highest form, and down and through his incarnations. Of course, all incarnations of all of us are going on at the same time. We're simply looking at them from linear composition because that's the way we think, and that is how our reality is structured.